Perfect. So Jen, Thomas, Jeff, thank you all for the invite and thank you for the time. I'm really excited to be presenting today with Stefan. We did have a trial run of this yesterday with another group as well, but one of the things that we started talking about and we've started seeing as folks are starting to actually try Azure Virtual Desktop in earnest is, as part of the migration plan and as part of the pilot process, we need to understand which users are good candidates to move over. We need to understand which apps are good candidates to move over. We need to understand how we're going to move that data over as well. And today, really kind of from our perspective, we want to focus a lot on the app. So Stefan's going to be spending the second half of the session really focusing on MSIX, App Attach, and the future of MSIX and App Attach. But I thought I'd kick off the session from Remo 3's perspective by introducing Remo 3. Myself, I'm Samit Halvadia, CTO here at Remo 3. And what Remo 3 really focuses on is giving you the data through automated testing to help you understand how to best deploy your applications to your end users. And I call this informed application delivery. It hasn't quite caught on yet, but I've been trying to, sell this story since my App DNA and Install Shield days, through my time at Citrix and now here at Remo 3. Because what we're starting to really see is that as folks are starting to move to multiple different delivery models, it's not just a linear thing anymore. People aren't just moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or XP to 7 or 32-bit to 64-bit like they used to do. There are now heterogeneous ways to deliver your application. So some applications might be delivered via Citrix or Workspace ONE or locally installed on-prem. Some are good candidates to be delivered via AVD. Some are good candidates to move to MSIX. Some are good candidates to actually keep in AppV because the performance might be slightly better. And the reality is when you take all these different moving parts and all these different permutations, especially when you're looking at a migration project or a pilot that's going to move to AVD, it can become pretty harrowing. And traditionally, what people focused on doing when they were looking at all these different deployment methodologies is start saying, well, I don't really know where to get started, so I'm going to bring my subject matter experts and my application owners to come and sit down and test these applications and tell me whether they're good for deployment. And for those of you that have ever gone through a migration, the success rate of getting a subject matter expert to stop doing their day job and put their butt in a seat for 45 minutes to test an app is very close to zero. So when we kind of thought about Remo 3 and the approach that we should take, it was really around, based on two principles. The first one is everything has to be completely unattended. There can be no human intervention when you're testing an application. We need to just be able to take large volumes of applications and test them against multiple deployment methodologies. That was the first principle. And the second principle was really around the fact that it has to be a binary result. Back in the day when we did static analysis with AppDNA, it was great. We had red, amber, green, and it at least gave you some insight. And it was cutting edge technology in 2008 when we started coming out with it. But now what we've started seeing is because of the amount of automation and cleverness that we have out there available to us today and compute, what we can do is we can actually install and truly test the applications and give you a binary result. It's a yes or a no. There's no maybe it requires further exploration. The answer is yes or no. Can I deploy this application on this platform? Yes or no. And our goal is really kind of taking that automation and creating a project plan to help you drive and accelerate your entire journey to AVD. And today we're specifically obviously going to be talking about AVD. Now, really our approach is driven by our intelligent smoke test, which I'll go into a little bit more detail when I show you the demo. But what we wanted to do with the platform is provide some insights, some analytics. Everything that I do now is data driven. I'm still a pretty emotional guy. So if someone comes to me and says, how do you feel about XYZ as an app? I can tell you that I think it's a piece of hot garbage or I think it's an amazing application, but that's not enough in terms of being able to make a decision on how important it is to the business and how I should best deliver it. So what we've started trying to do is take all of the analytics and the data around the compatibility, does it install? The functionality, does it work? And the performance, does it work better, worse, or the same that it does on its current platform when I want to deploy it to AVD? We want to collect all of this data, again, completely unattendedly, and then give you those insights so that you can start figuring out, all right, great, I can deliver this in AVD, or this is going to be a multi-session friendly application, or this is something that is a good candidate for MSIX, which Stefan will go into more detail around the do's and the don'ts in the next section. But everything that we're trying to do here, not only being unattended and binary in terms of yes or no, it's meant to really focus on mitigating that risk. So all of this data is meant to be collected prior to deployment. I remember how many Patch Tuesdays back in the day or cumulative updates where I would talk to a customer, an investment firm that would say, well, our Patch Tuesday is kind of cross your fingers, spray and pray. Now that we're starting to see cumulative updates on a monthly basis, we're starting to see 2 feature releases a year for Windows 10. And even with Windows 11 coming out, that's also going to be a migration and an annual release for Windows 11 as well. So all these changes introduce risk. And if you have the ability to truly leverage automation to understand the impact of that change to your application portfolio, now you're getting somewhere with data intelligence. Now, the way that we actually do this is we take a look at your application portfolio, and as long as you have the source media and the installation source media, we can pull all of that data around the applications and then go through the process of running it through the Remo3 engine, which I'll show you here, which is a platform that we've built on Azure. And we go through the process of saying, okay, let's say you have these 5 different delivery models, or in this case, we'll talk about 3 different delivery models that are acceptable for my business. Either I want to move to AVD with multi-session and app attach, or if I can't do that, that's okay. I have a development team that needs their own personal AVDs because I want them to have a great user experience. It's not necessarily about the cost savings. Or I want to keep some of my stuff in my Citrix environment or locally installed, or whatever the case might be. Now, our goal is prior to doing this deployment, the project plan should be able to go through the engine, push your applications into the right bucket to say through our automated testing engine, at the end of it, here's the actionable outcome. These applications are good candidates to move to AVD with app attach. These applications should be run in single session in a personal AVD or a persistent environment. And these applications just leave because they're not going to move to Windows 10. They need to sit on server 2012 and remain there in perpetuity, or maybe move to server 2019. But what we're doing here is upfront leveraging the automation to start giving you the data to understand what's the best way to deploy this application. How do I get the right application in the right format, whether it's AppV, MSI, a PowerShell wrapper, or on an executable, or whether it's an MSIX? How do I get the right application in the right format to my user to deliver a good user experience? So very quickly, the way that we actually do the testing and modernization is we take these applications, put them into our Remo3 cloud, and then actually spin up a VM. And this is where our secret sauce kind of resides, and I'll show you this in the demo. But what we do is we pull and spin up the VM of your target desired platform, install the application, test the application, and then give you that binary result of, is it good to go or is it not? And then ultimately give you a recommendation. And if it is an MSIX candidate, we'll go ahead and do the conversion for you. So when you start thinking about that overall journey, it's not just for the migration, because post deployment, you're going to start figuring out that there is going to be change coming, whether it's new versions of the applications, whether it's a new version of the OS, whether it's new security settings or GPO settings in your existing base image, whether you update your golden image, whether you add some additional applications. So as you kind of go through this entire process, the thing to kind of keep in mind is the first bit around the migration is understanding and having the data to make the decision. Sorry, guys, I think I just stopped sharing my screen.
Kind of. It's back.
Is it back?
Yep, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on slide 1 though. So
Okay, we go. So, and the idea here is once you've actually gone through the migration and you have the data to plan that journey's not over post-deployment. That journey is going to continue happening. And because of the fact that you can just continue doing the automated testing to understand that impact of change, you end up in a kind of a CI/CD pipeline of change management without ever having to bother SMEs. So the idea here is for us to really kind of understand the impact of that change, both pre-deployment and post-deployment, so that you guys can make the right decision on how to best deliver the application and manage that application. So I'm going to jump into the demo. I don't know whether we want to do questions. Jen, how do you typically do this? Do we have any questions, or should I jump into the demo and we take all of them at the end?
whatever works for you. I don't see any questions yet in the chat. So why don't you go ahead with the demo and we'll see what happens as we go along. If we do get questions in the middle of it, would you be okay with interruptions?
Absolutely. I'm a big boy. I can handle it.
Okay, thanks.
Let me pull up the demo environment. Oops. So here, what you guys should be seeing is the Remo 3 Cloud platform. So the first thing I'm going to kind of talk through is the intelligence smoke test, right? So right now, what we're looking at is I've uploaded and onboarded quite a few applications. So just from a user experience perspective, it's very straightforward in terms of getting your applications onto the platform. It's as simple as just asking a couple of questions. What would you like to do today? Do you want to check your suitability for AVD? Do you want to actually modernize your applications and move them to MSIX? Or am I just doing post-deployment change management? Like I want to see what's going to happen if I move from 1909 to 2004. Or am I doing a Citrix migration? Or am I doing a VMware migration? And just by answering a couple of quick questions, we could go in and say, what OS are you on today? Let's say I'm on 1903. Where do I want to go to? 2004 multi-session. Upload your packages, and off you go. Now, once you actually upload the packages, it will send you a note telling you we've got to create the VMs. We're going to go through the process of actually testing the applications. Go get a cup of coffee. We'll see you guys in 30 minutes or an hour or 2 days, depending on how many applications you put through. And that's the level of human intervention we're looking at to start getting the testing process started, right? Once we've actually uploaded the applications, this is where you're going to start seeing us do a lot of the work on the back end. So if you see kind of what we did here, I picked that migration from 1903 on-prem to 2004 sitting up in AVD, and I wanted to see which of my applications will work. And the good news is the majority of them had no issues moving over. So again, just by simply going through the process, you suddenly have that peace of mind to say, all right, great, I know my application is going to work. And what we do to ensure that you have this data is we go through that intelligent smoke test process that I was talking about. So the thing about the intelligent smoke test is we don't take anything for granted. Because something says chrome.msi doesn't mean to me that it is a browser. What we do, because RPA gets out of date so quickly in the management overhead if you change a dialog box or a new version of the application, that just wasn't the right way for us to approach this. So our approach around the testing is very straightforward, right? But it's incredibly clever. We say, all right, great. We're going to install our executable with as long as it's a silent installation, doesn't matter what the file format is. We go through, install the application, and then we look at the parent process of all the shortcuts that are installed. And from there, we go through a series of what we consider interesting clicks, right? I'm using air quotes there. So in Chrome, for instance, we open a new browser, we visit a website, right? Like you'll see things happening in terms of a new tab, and you'll see these processes that are being executed as part of this intelligent smoke test. Again, We're not saying that this is going to be a complete UAT, but what we want to give you is the insight of understanding whether it'll install, whether it'll actually function over the course of a 1 to 3 minute test, and then whether or not that application is going to perform well. So as we go through the process, you'll see that we're actually testing every single executable and clicking through the different processes and children processes that we're going to spawn. But ultimately, the really great value that we get out of this is some of the additional data around the performance. And of course, you can go through and compare your baseline of 1903, compare it with 2004, and start making decisions. Now, all of this data is also available via an API that you can extract and start saying, I want to start building out performance-based delivery models for my applications. I don't just care about compatibility or functionality. I want to really optimize my performance. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that you should size your machines off of, because it's, in this case, a minute worth of data. But what it still gives you is that confidence to know that, hey, it's not going to perform any worse than it did in my existing environment. Or actually, as an MSIX, it might perform better.
So we have a question in the chat. An application package is uploaded for testing. What is the process for creating that application package?
So creating the package is something that's done outside of Remo 3, right? So if you choose to use a Flexera Admin Studio, or you're using another packaging utility, which is what most enterprises will do, they'll use some type of packaging technology to take your application from the ISV, go through, convert it to MSI or AppV, do the customizations, and then deploy it through Config Manager, Intune, or MEM. Those are the packages that we want to go ahead and import into here, the ones that are customized and ready for deployment in your environment.
So
Thank you.
basically, it would be the silent install packages, that you've created for SCCM or anything.
Yep. Yep. Any other questions around that?
No, thank you.
Sure. And like I said, here we're starting to get really great data around the application and the performance associated with those applications. And at least what this does right off the bat, and this is kind of the most important piece that I'll tell people, is that you suddenly have that level of confidence over the course of an hour for these 30 applications or 2 hours or whatever it takes, that, you know what, 93% of my applications will move. And Stefan will tell you, right? Just that little piece of data and that peace of mind to say, this is a project worth pursuing. It's not going to be the amount of heavy lift that I initially thought. It just gives you that ability to say, okay, I can scope this. We can make this. This doesn't have to be that giant forklift migration that we had to deal with from Windows XP 32-bit to Windows 7 64-bit. And it's this data that's going to actually drive your decisions around how to best deliver these applications. Now, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So let me put a caveat around that, because when we start thinking about the fact that we can move these applications, some of the keystone features, in my opinion, of things of AVD are multi-session. Windows 10 Enterprise that's able to run in a multi-session environment, as well as MSIX and ultimately AppAttach. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do here. We could say, you know what, that my time to value is important here. I'm going to move all these workloads as they are into AVD, and then take an application by application journey to move to MSIX, or figure out which ones are good candidates to run in a multi-session pooled environment. But here, again, because of the automation, we have the ability with the intelligent smoke test to orchestrate the testing to see if something is a suitable candidate for MSIX. And then if it is, we take it one step further and say, let's just go ahead and convert it and see if it works. So what you'll see here is we went through a couple of different applications, and we actually converted the applications because they were suitable candidates for conversion. However, some are unsuitable candidates for conversion, and we say, pass. This is not something that you should be deploying as an MSIX. So initially, when we go through the process, we can look at something like Java even, right? So we'll go through, we see this MSI from Java. We go through the process of conversion, And you'll see that this is very similar because it is being orchestrated by the intelligent smoke test, where we can go through, convert that package. And here we're actually using the MSIX command line interface utility that Microsoft provides. But we're actually topping and tailing it with our own templates and with our own automated remediations over time, right? And these are things that are going to continue getting better. So when we go through that initial MSIX conversion, we've done this with the Microsoft MSIX engineering team. And what we found is that there are certain classifications of errors that we've run into that we think that we can do an automatic fix up of without throwing the entire PSF sync at it, right? So what we go through is, as part of the conversion, we look and see if it exhibits any of the problematic behaviors that we think that we can fix. And then we actually, in the conversion, start the MSIX correction process. We apply the MSIX fixes, and then we ultimately complete the MSI conversion with our additional fixes. So what we started seeing is that by applying these 17 different types of classifications of fixes, we've improved the conversion rate from out of the box, Stefan, to, I don't know, 30, 40, 50% to, of the ones that are convertible, we're sitting at 80% around those. So it's a pretty compelling thing here. Now, it's great that we're converting it, by the way, but what we really need to do is, again, test that application to make sure that it does work as an MSIX package. So once we've done the conversion, we can go through the process and say, all right, which ones have been tested? So again, we go through that intelligent smoke test process. Again, this is all automated, and we grab that performance data just like we would with any other Windows application and give you 2 different data sets, 3 different data sets, 5 different data sets around each of your delivery models to tell you what's the best way to actually deliver this. Any questions around that? Okay. Now, once you've actually gone through the deployment itself, right, and you've started migrating your applications and taking them on this journey to AVD, there is going to be change, right? You are going to be moving from 2004 to 21H2 or 2009 or Windows 11. As you start making these changes, we do have the ability to continually manage those change and manage the risk associated with that change by leveraging the automated testing again, right? So think of it the same way that you would do around a migration. However, now you're just invoking it when you're ready to deploy a new feature pack, or you're ready to deploy a new Golden OS image, or you're ready to deploy a cumulative update on a Windows image. So we go through that same exact process and give you a like-for-like comparison of moving from 1903 to 2004, which ones will pass, which ones will fail. The ones that'll fail, you can actually get some additional data around why it failed, and start making decisions around, well, this one it actually didn't even restore the machine. But if I pick another one, you'll start seeing that we have additional data around why an application failed. It was missing a dependency, or the OS did not have the required components, right? So like install CD burner 64-bit, it installed without an issue, but when we went through and tried to execute the application, we were missing a lot of the different components necessary here. So with that, I'm going to take a pause. I think I'm at the end of my time, but the idea for us here, again, is to provide you an automated platform to give you the data that's necessary to start either planning your migration, executing your migration, or managing your post-deployment environment so that you can mitigate the risk associated with change as it pertains to your applications. Ultimately, the goal for us is to take this from a technology platform to a business intelligence platform in the next, couple of releases over time, over the next 6 to 12 months, where we can start saying, actually, not only are we going to take all of the technical know-how that we really have around automated testing, but start bundling it up in a way that you can use Power BI and some of these other engines to come up with really clever delivery models and application delivery strategies that are based on each organization's needs, whether it's cost optimization, risk mitigation, or user experience, right? We have the ability to start taking all of this data and using it in a way that's going to benefit the business. Right now, I still consider us very much a technology platform that does a super clever thing around leveraging automation to test any Windows application workload, but ultimately we can take that one step further.
So
And with
this is very, very cool. This is my first time seeing it, so I'm very impressed. And I think there were some comments in the chat as well about the versioning feature for OS and apps. Looks very useful and interesting. And so how does one go about getting their hands wet with the product? So if our group here wanted to test it out and give it a try, what can we do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. So we can set up demo tenants for you, but the best way to do it is if we go, let me share this really quick. If you hit our alias, resume. If you hit our alias, sales@remo3.com, someone will come back to you, let them know you were part of the user group, and then they'll set up a chat with me or someone from my team and set you up with the tenant, 5 applications or whatever, and off you go.
Great, thank you. This is
Yeah.
super. All right, some good feedback. All right. I don't see any more questions, but thank you so much. I'd like to try it out myself.
Sounds good, Jen. We'll look forward to it. All right, with
Yes.
that, I can take my face off the camera and give it to Stefan.
It's okay, we can watch your face.
I know you like looking at my face.
Awesome. Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Stefan. I'm a PM on the remote desktop services team. Wouldn't be a surprise probably for most of you that is the team that ships Azure Virtual Desktop. And in the last, I don't know, 2 years and a change, I've been working on this thing called MSIX App Attach. And this is the slash agenda for today. I would like to cover a little bit of why we came up with MSIX App Attach, how it works in Azure Virtual Desktop, potentially do a demo there. We'll see how we do on time. Then talk about a little bit about MSIX, what not to do with MSIX, some of the challenges, some of the concerns, some of the opportunities there. Then I would like to give you a sneak peek in some of the new stuff coming in MSIX App Attach. That also will cover the shared package containers conversation. And then I will dive in my favorite topic. It says 300. It's not a reference to the movie, but it's a reference to Napoleon and his 100 days in when he was back from his exile as an emperor. And how do you really manage your AVD environment at the 300th day? So you deployed it, you tested your application, and how you do that in scale. And you'll see how that ties with what Samit was talking about. So let's dive in. MSIX App Attach history. Pancakes, right? It's morning in the Pacific Northwest, but that is not the reason we have these pancakes on the screen. If you've ever had the dubious pleasure of listening to any of my other presentations on MSIX App Attach, you've probably seen this slide. The reason we're talking about the pancakes is because we are building these components, these layers for Azure Virtual Desktop that allow us to achieve total segregation of the 3 pillars of what define the end user experience. So we have the OS, Not much we can do there. The OS is the OS. I mean, there's things we can do, but the OS is the one layer. Then we have FS Logic and OneDrive working hand in hand to take care of the second layer, which is the user state and the user data. Great, we have that covered. And then when it comes to the applications, well, there's not really today in AVD, unless you're using AppV or some of the other partner solution. When you start talking about applications and OS and that segregation, in reality, it doesn't exist. So it's all a mess. It's a gibberish. Everything is put together, and you are asked to figure out a smart way of maintaining your applications and your images and your OS. With MSIX App Attach, we are trying to decouple the OS and the applications. A while back, when I was still in school, somebody had the brilliant idea that Windows applications will be on the C drive and they will be they'll be writing to a bunch of system locations just because they were better integrating with the operating system. And fast forward 20 years later, we're still fighting with all applications going on the C drive and messing up the operating system and creating a management nightmare. This has been recognized. The introduction of the MSIX format itself was aimed. One of the aims was to remove that tattooing of the application on the OS, and we'll tell you about that later. But this is the whole container concept when we talk about MSIX. MSIX is a container of a send. Okay, so with MSIX, we have this mechanism to kind of separate the layers and define really the final layer, the application layer. And that's why we're talking about the pancakes. It's a good example of the stacks. You put everything on top of each other, and you have your breakfast or your end user experience. But then also, if you need to swap the OS, you don't have to really move all the pancakes. Just grab the bottom one, take it out, put it back. And with that said, this is the hypothetical, this is the scenario today, right? The left-hand side. If you have 3 work worlds due to that tattooing of the applications, well, tattooing really, installing the application on the OS, what is happening is that if you need to have 3 separate work worlds and you need to guarantee that the work worlds and the applications are accessible only by the users that are entitled to that access, you are forced down the path of creating multiple master images. There's really no way around it. Yes, technically with application layering you can get there, but one of the problems with application layering is what Samit was talking about. How do you get the applications there? With MSIX App Attach, we can achieve this somewhat dream state. Imagine that you don't have to worry about your image anymore. Right? The image is your image. You get it from the gallery. You run some organization-specific optimization on it. Like, let's say, you have some compliance requirements, some security concerns. You do those. And then with that golden image, you can really even put it on the same, all the users on the same VM, because MSIX, the fact that it runs in the container allows you this isolation and allows you to assign the applications per user. So this way, the engineering user wouldn't see the sales application. And that is the application delivery strategy that we are working in, to empower in Azure Virtual Desktop. We want to go away from master image management. That concept should go away. It's really you create the image, and then everything is MSIX App Attach on top of that. How MSIX App Attach works in Azure Virtual Desktop. This is a favorite diagram. I've probably talked about it like I don't know, 100,000 times at this point. But let's walk through it really quickly. If I am the user, I go to Azure Virtual Desktop, and then Azure Virtual Desktop would broker a connection, we'll orchestrate a connection to a VM. Now, if we have everything aligned with this stack vision, that VM will just one of many, and it wouldn't be unique. Like, we don't want the VMs to be unique. We want them to be just a stamp of a template. Then what's happening after that, once we start establishing the session on that machine, the magic of FSLogic happens, right? Somehow, under the covers, we go grab the user profile and we trick the OS of thinking those files, the user state is on the C drive when in reality is on a file share. And conceptually, we can do the same thing with applications, right? Due to the nature of MSIX, we are able to deliver those applications dynamically at user logon, and that is what we call app attach, is this delivery mechanism on top of MSIX. So MSIX is the packaging format, MSIX app attach is the delivery mechanism. When we talk about MSIX app attach, we have a few somewhat, they're not unique terms, but they have a special connotation in the world of app attach. So expanding on MSIX, I will chat, I have a slide on this a little bit later, but we'll hold on for that one. So staging, in the diagram, that was the process of where we tell the OS during its boot, you need to be aware of these MSIX images that you need to deliver for your users when they show up and if they show up. Registration is really it's per user, and it's really what makes that first diagram that allows you that application to be registered only for that one user. So if engineering and sales are on the same machine, and I register the sales application for the sales user, the engineering user wouldn't get it because it's not registered for him. He does not have the permissions to it. Like, we don't want him to have it. We also do this. Let me ask you this question before we go into the deferred registration. How many applications you're averagely using a day? 10, 15, 20, if you really like me and you don't know when to close an application. But when you start your day after your machine has been restarted, what happens? Do you start all the application at once, or you start them on demand based on when you need it? So maybe the first thing is you open your Outlook to see when your next meeting is. Check email. Then you figure out, oh, I have a meeting. Let's open Teams. Oh, I need my presentation. So open PowerPoint. And the default registration, it does exactly the same thing for MSIX. Instead of us having to pay this somewhat heavy penalty of delivering the 20 plus applications at logon, if we do some minor work there in the beginning, deliver the start menu icons, the file associations, the registry entries for the application, but we don't do the full registration until you actually need that application. So that's deferred registration. And finally, the register is another key moment here. So we talked about how FSLogic takes care of the user data. When you have an application, that application may or may not, these days most do have some application-specific user state that needs to be kept, right? So if you move that application to another machine, you will probably like your user preferences for that applications to be kept. Your most recent open files, for example, is one of those. And we want to preserve that. And the way we do it is we taught the operating system, we taught Windows, that when the container in which the MSIX application is running gets deflated, we will take not the entire application, not all its files, but we know which of those thousands of operations the application did went to the user profile. We tricked the application, the things that they were going to the user profile, they were actually in the container. And at the registration time, we'll take that and we'll flush it to the user profile. So then FSLogic can take it and move it to the next machine when the user comes in. Okay, MSIX image. So what is this strange beast, the MSIX image, right? Why do we need an MSIX image? So goes something like that. We have a VM, right? So you have your laptop. And you go and you, let's say, take iTunes. iTunes is an MSIX application today. And you have to download it over the internet, right? And that costs money, time, mainly like the larger the file, the longer it takes. So really that MSIX, it's really compressed. It's a zip file. Right? Probably know that if you rename it to .zip, you can go and see what's inside that file. So the reason we compress the files is because we have to deliver them over large distances and somewhat unreliable networks. Now, when we do that for one user, it's kind of fine, right? You do it one time and you're done. But what if you had 10 users on that device? Let's say it wasn't a laptop, it was a server of sort, and you have to do it per user. Every time you get that file, you have to install it per user, and so really like you have to take the zipped file and you have to unzip it. That's the first thing. You can't just install the zip file, right? So about, if you go and measure it, about 80% of the time that it takes to install an MSIX package natively, it's us unzipping the file. And the bigger the file, the more time it takes. And then in a multi-session environment, you have to do it per user, but also have to do it per VM. So every time a VM shows up, you have to pay that penalty of unzipping the file. So then you can do the installation. Well, it really doesn't make sense in the VDI world to do that, in a service by computing world. It doesn't make sense to have to, every time the user logs in, you have to do the same operation over and over again. Every time a VM boots up, you have to do the same operation over and over again, which is an expensive operation. It's a big O of N, like the larger the operation, the larger the file, the longer it takes to unzip it. And what if, right? What if we unzip it one time? Because why would unzip it? Well, we're in Azure. The network is highly reliable. The distances are short. So the trade-off of us having to ship a large file over the network versus the trade-off in CPU compute resources that we need to pay every time users log on, every time we have to install the application, every time the VM boots, it's like just overwhelming. So we have this requirement where we take the MSIX file, we convert it in its loose file format. That means it's not zipped, it's just like really a bunch of files, and we put it in a VHD. And that's what we called the MSIX image. And that saves us a lot of bandwidth, saves us a lot of compute and a lot of time, and makes that logon experience much faster, as nobody has, and the boot experience. So nobody has to wait for us to be unzipping files. So that is the story about the MSIX image. Okay, MSIX App in Azure Virtual Desktop. So what I would like to do here is do a really quick show and tell of how MSIX App looks in the Azure portal today. As some of the later pieces of our conversation will be around what are we trying to do differently. And of course, as any good demo, I click on the wrong link. Let me go into my demo environment, sign in. Here, I'm going to go into Azure Virtual Desktop. And I'm going to select one of my host pool. And let's stop here and chat a little bit. So we talked about during the very first diagram that we'll be able to isolate the application per user and per workload, right? But we still need to tell the operating system which application you're supposed to deliver. So the first phase is to come here and tell your session host, the VMs in your host pool, which packages they need to deliver to their users. And the way you do it is you click add, and hopefully you have your file share correctly configured. So we are able to go and read the application from the file share. So what is happening right now is this UI goes through the Azure Virtual Desktop Resource Provider, goes talk to the VMs in your host pool and ask them, can you go to this path? Can you load the content of that MSX image and display it for me? In this case, this is obviously Power BI. We can see the version and we can see the application inside. And then we have some management operations here, like the log on blocking versus on the demand. That's really the deferred registration. And active versus inactive is, well, I'm still not ready to expose this to the users. I want to have it, so I'll just add it, but it will be inactive. If I activate it, then I can go and assign it to users. During this time, we are also validating the MSIX package. When we put it in that MSIX image, we did certain things and we did them in a certain fashion. So we make sure that all the echoes are correctly, that I haven't changed, so somebody hasn't compromised that MSIX. We make sure the certificate is there. Make sure that all the VMs in the host pool have access to this path. And yes, we are very strict about it, because if it's not there, we won't let you proceed. Why? Because then the end user won't be able to get their application. And let's be honest, the reason we have virtualization and all that good stuff is because users need their applications and their data. And if the application is not there or the data is not there, we should know. We need to fix it. So I've added the package to the host pool, right? So already we have Power BI, so if I had added it the second time, would have errored out. Okay, some of them are active, and you'll be like, okay, great, I'm done. I can go ahead and log into the Azure Virtual Desktop Client and be able to see my application. Well, hold on. Remember why we were talking about multiple users and they all get their own applications? If it was as simple as just added to the host pool, we're not really serving that purpose. Now you have added the package to the host pool, you have associated, but now you need to go at the application group level. And here you need to define in that application group, what apps do you want for your user? So we're going to say MSIX package. We don't have Chrome, but let's say we can take PuTTY. And here, this particular application has multiple entry points. So it's, those of you familiar with PuTTY will know that it's actually 5 applications. You're able to do all that. Again, that is the magic of us talking to the agent, talking to the file on the file share. Click Save. So in my app group, I've added a new application. That means that if user 1 is part of this group, he won't see these applications because he's not part of that group. Excellent. You're like, I'm done. Well, what about the users? We still need to do the user assignments, right? So this is the magic sauce. If we want a user to see the application, we gotta make sure that we give that user permission to that application. And this is the metadata that the RD agent will read from AVD to be able to do MSIX app attach. So that is the story of what we have today in the portal. Now, this is useless. Now let's go talk about MSIX app attach requirements a little bit. So you saw me that I referenced a file share, right? And I did spend some time elaborating on why we need access to the file share. So the file share must be resolvable via SMB. Okay, somewhat straightforward. Like if you want to be able to talk to a resource, you need to have connection to the resource. That's easily achievable. The middle one, the permissions. This is the big one, right? Right now, about 2/3 of the escalation, close to 2/3 of the escalations are about permissions. The confusion there is that when we talk about historically, when we've been talking about permissions to the file share, it's always been in the context of the user needs of permissions to the file share. Why the user needs permission for the file share? Because the user needs to go save their files. We need to load their profile from the file share. Well, MSIX AppAttach, when it comes to doing its job, does the registration per user. That's the only thing it does per user, and the registration. Everything else is per machine. Why? Because it makes sense. It's optimal performance. It's the best design that you can do. So instead of having every user opening the file, you opening it one time per machine, and then the user shows up. We don't care if they need it or don't need it. It's there. Once we do the registration, they get the access. So the permissions to the file share for MSIX AppAttach are per machine. They're not per user. And that's tricky because there are certain identity providers in Azure that don't support machine entities. And that is, I'm talking about Azure Active Directory Domain Services. So if you want to use Azure Active Directory Domain Services with MSIX AppAttach, you need to make sure there's nothing you can make sure. Really, that file share cannot be, the access to it cannot be based on Azure ADDS. What you can do as a workaround is you can go to really old-fashioned NTFS permissions, where on one of your machines you put a premium hard drive, and on that hard drive you really do kind of like file share to all, and that's it. So enough about the permissions and the file share. As you can see, problematic topic for me. I need to let it go. Let's go talk about the polling interval. So for MSIX AppAttach today, you saw me do the exercise through the UI where I published the application and all that good stuff. So when we add the package to the host pool, we do the app group creation, we do the publishing of the application in the app group, then we assign it to the user, and then we log in. There is a maximum of 5 minutes interval in which all the machines on the host pool will be notified of that change. So if you're really eager to test, you have to be aware that there's that 5-minute interval between you doing a modification of the package and that package showing up on your machine. Could be less, but it's a 5-minute maximum. We have a way to control it in the V2 of MSIX AppAttach. We'll make that dynamic, so we'll remove this polling interval, but it's there today. And if you are very fast in the UI, you might hit it. We do have another slide on permissions, but I'm going to skip it because I kind of covered it already. Let's talk about a little bit. Go ahead.
Sorry, Stefan. We had a few questions in the chat. Do you want to handle them afterwards, or do you want to?
Let me see. I kind of lost the chat window with all this presentation. Okay,
I can read.
Yeah, let's do some Q&A. I can see them now. Okay, so I'm going to start backwards. Can you show us what the file share permissions to assign and how to? So Piotr, I will send you a link to a video that shows that entire process. I mean, I can quickly do it, the file share, but it's about a half an hour exercise by itself. So really, in my case, I have a storage account. So this one, I don't know which one, MSIX share. So on the storage account, the first thing I gotta make sure is, since I'm using Azure, I'm using Active Directory Domain Service, so I have a domain controller. I have to make sure that that storage account is joined to my domain controller. And today you do that with PowerShell. There is no mechanism through the UI, and I don't think this one is actually joined. So let's try the other one. Okay. Configuration. Oh, there is an entry point. I thought was under configuration. Is not. I guess I can't see it there right now. That shows you where is this account being joined. So once it's joined, so that's the first thing, create the account, do the operations to join it to your domain controller. If that was, if you're doing FSLogic, Azure ADDS, that's just a ticket on and off. Once you have created the account, there are two levels of permissions. So this is kind of the previous slide. When we're talking about storage accounts in Azure, we have NTFS and RBAC permissions, and they both have to be configured. The RBAC permissions are the Azure AD level permissions, right? And the NTFS permissions are the Windows. So you have to configure those. The RBAC permissions are very straightforward. You come to your account, you go to access control, add role assignment. You pick, so here we have as storage share contributor, contributor elevated, and reader. So for MSIX app attached reader is enough, and then you select a group or the machine identity, right? So this is one of my machines. So these are the NTFS level, the RBAC level permission. Now, then you will need to go to your domain controller or any VM actually in your, doesn't have to be domain controller, in your network, and you really will need to do the old-fashioned right click and share. So I'm going to use this environment. So I will come to, let's say I had it. So I will need to run the command to mount this is the one-time thing that I need to do it one time to mount my storage account. And then I will go and just say properties, share. And this is it. These are the NTFS permissions. And here I will make sure that the same group or some same account identity that I'm doing in RBAC are here. So a lot of words goes down to create the storage account. The storage account has to be present as an entity in your identity provider. Then the permissions that you configure on that identity have to be per machine level. And if there is a storage account, it's both NTFS and RBAC. Missing one will yield bad results. You won't be able to proceed. Okay, and I will send you the video, a link to a video covering the steps in detail. We also have articles on docs.microsoft.com that covers the step-by-step and on Tech Community. So Arif had a question, can we assign apps to hosts in host pool or host pool instead of users or group? Well, in MSIX app attach, the packages get assigned per host pool. And just honestly, that means nothing when you think about what the user gets to see. In the host pool, you define the app groups, and on that app group, you define what applications you want inside and what users or user groups you want to have access to that application. Alex Kirlin had a question, when do profiles come into play? I'm assuming that is around the diagram that I did, but the way FSLogic works is as soon as the operating system, the WOGON service, accepts the connection, that the RDP request to establish a session, FSLogic has a listener, has a hook into that service. As soon as they see the WOGON service trying to establish a session, literally halts it, goes grab the user, well, doesn't really grab it, but repoints the user profile on the file share, and then releases the handle on the WOGON service. The WOGON service then continues on its path, starts checking is the user present on this machine, or it's present, or it has some data. I'm good, move on. So that's how the profiles work with FSLogic. If the question was when do you use user profiles, that's a slightly larger question and it's more fundamental, but I would say my take is you should always use user profiles. There is always a user profile, even on your local device, there's a user profile. You just you're so used to not thinking about it, but it's there. User profile should be always there, even in a personal dedicated desktop, as it allows you a lot of flexibility when it comes to recovery and availability of your data and your settings. Yeah, so the video, I will do it after this, Piotr. Yeah. Okay, so where was I? Talk about certificates really quickly. Okay, so MSIX packages have to be digitally signed. Period. There's no way around it. If you're building a POC environment, quite likely you're like, I'm just gonna use PowerShell and quickly create a certificate. Cool, that's allowed. Make sure it's a code signing certificate, not a wildcard certificate for a web page, right? You digitally sign your test package. You go through the exercise that I showed you in the UI with MSIX app attach, and so you get the error certificate not present on the host pool. If you're using private certificates, those certificates must be on every VM of the host pool. That is a requirement. Why? Because it's a private certificate. It doesn't come from a CA. We don't know if we are supposed to allow it or not. So you have to tell us that. And the way you tell us is by installing it in the right place on the host pool. Okay. This is the big one, right? All this time, I hope this was obvious. However, I often end up in a conversation when this is not obvious. If you want to do MSIX app attach, you have to have an MSIX package. And you'll be like, yes, Stefan, it's obvious. Well, I can share in my mailbox and you can see how often I get asked this question. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. That's obvious. Samit have done a good job explaining some of the challenges with how you get to MSIX. I would like to dive deeper on what is MSIX, because it's actually slightly more than just a file type, right? It's definitely there's a file type. There's .msix. That's one thing. But it's also a set of tools that we release, that Microsoft releases, right? A set of APIs somewhere in the back end, right? So you are able. So there was a question earlier when Samit was talking about how do you create an MSIX package. Well, if you have the code, you go get the tooling and you really compile or build your application into the .msix format. Right? There is a extension for Visual Studio if that is your choice of poison when it comes to development. If you have the code, that's how you do it. If you don't have the code, well, you do use tools like the MSIX packaging tool that you get from the store. There are other excellent third-party tools that allow you to do both the builds and the repackaging. There's a tooling component to MSIX. And finally, and this is the very important one, MSIX is a runtime in Windows. So when we take that MSIX package, something needs to be smart enough to be able to recognize that it's an application that needs to go in the container, that you're supposed to be able to stage it, that they register it, and all these things that we've been talking about. So there's three components around MSIX. When we're having the conversation, let's make sure that we are clearly calling out where the question lands. Is it the runtime? Is it the tooling? Or is it you're just wondering about what is .msix? Okay, and I've done this a little bit backwards, but backwards because if as a PM, I'm supposed to start with the numbers and then explain to you how all these numbers make sense, and that's why we why the numbers drive our decision process, and we get there. These numbers are just talking points that I will help enforce some of the messaging here. So MSIX, one of the things that it is, one of the heads of this hydra are the containers. MSIX runs the application in isolation, isolated from the operating system. The file system and the registry, the application, it's tricked into thinking that it's writing to them when really it's writing to a direction, to a folder inside of the container. Okay. If we start thinking, what can you put in the container? Like the next question is like, and some of the a lot of the value that Raimo brings is around exactly being able to tell you, can this be put in a container? And there's some things that are obviously you should not even try, and you can get to that decision if you're thinking about it. If you have Raimo, you just don't even have to think about it. But let me cover them for you, for us. Drivers of any kind. Drivers are supposed to be these machine-wide objects. So why are you putting them in a container? It doesn't make sense. Antiviruses and VPN clients, like what you're trying to do now, like the antivirus is going to go into the container and you're going to be scanning the container for viruses. Well, that makes sense, right? VPN clients, they're supposed to do layer 3, like from the ISO model, network level forwarding of packets, but you put them in a container. So what you're expecting is going to work, is not going to work. Why are you even doing it? This is supposed to be something that deals with hardware. Well, layer 3 is not really hardware, but it's close enough. It's supposed to deal with raw bits moving in and out, and you're trying to put a container on top of that. It doesn't make sense. The other one, the middle one that I've kind of been avoiding, .NET components and other frameworks. Like Samit did a great example of Java. So first rule of repackaging, know your apps. And this is where we are already failing, because most enterprises don't know their apps. They don't know who wrote it. They don't know how it works. Sometimes they don't even have the install media, right? And if you don't know your app, there will be a fun journey for you. Some applications require specific frameworks. For example, you might need 2 versions of the Java framework for 2 different applications. Then it makes sense for those frameworks to go inside in their own container, and they will not fight because they're isolated. Sometimes you have a framework like, let's say, .NET Core. You just want it for all your applications. You don't care. It makes sense to be for the entire OS, right? Put it in the master image. So this is the things that we advise not to do when it comes to MSIX, and from then MSIX app attach. We have a full list. I have on the bottom of this deck, there is a slide with the resources. That has a full list of all the limitations that we have around what you can put in MSIX. When you, the right-hand side, the evaluate phase. What I've seen in the last 2 years as we were going through the private preview, public preview, and now GA of MSIX app attach is that it's very easy to get MSIX app attach to work. Very easy once you figure out your file share, right? Once you figure out your file share, the app will work. And why would it work? Because you're using the trivial apps, right? Notepad++, Chrome, right? Edge. Yay, it worked. I'm ready for production. And you show up in a production with how many apps your organization has. So about 2-3 years ago, Microsoft did this study, which is the first number on the left-hand side, bottom, that an average enterprise that has more than 500 employees, we're talking about 1,000 applications. There are some nightmares there with tens of thousands of applications. You will have a lot of applications. They will be old. Well, maybe not you, your customers. And you need to evaluate all those applications. Will they work? And without advanced repackaging knowledge, about half of those applications will not work. You will repackage them, right? You will be able to make them .msix, and they won't work. Things will be missing because that visibility into what the application does, somebody needs to go and evaluate that. Hence why we have rule number 1, know your application. This whole shenanigans with the applications costs time and money. So on average, and this is from the same survey that we did with about 3,000 organizations, a quarter of an enterprise IT budget goals for managing application lifecycle. I'm trying to migrate to the new version of the application. I'm trying to migrate to the new version of the OS. I don't know if it's going to work, but we migrated it. Like, let's say we did add V to MSIX. Great success, right? Let's go celebrate. Hold on. Don't celebrate yet. Are you sure 100% of the time that the before and after behavior of the application will be exactly the same? That when the user goes inside and starts using the application, they're suddenly not going to get a error message 3 screens down saying like, this is broken, I'm missing this DOL. So when you go into large organizations with thousands of applications, you need to be able to do before and after testing for when you change something in your environment. And that cannot be a manual process. I am sorry. If you have that much money, yeah, sure, we should talk. When it comes to managing those applications, repackaging them, and all that good stuff, the average cost, and that is like, I'm being somewhat generous here, to repackage an application. So for somebody to take your application, go evaluate it, and tell you this application can work in MSIX, these are the things that you're supposed to fix, kind of what Samit showed. If you have to go and get a vendor to do that work for you, expect to be about not less than $1,000 per application. And guess what? You have to do that every next time you either change the OS or the app gets updated. Unless you get a native MSIX, then this is off the. Okay. Lost my place. And then we come to this here. And I kind of talked about it. But it's a slide that I stole from Andrew Klinik, who is the principal lead for DXP. Sorry, for MSIX, which is the DXP, the team that owns MSIX. So you get your app. If that is an enterprise level app, you will need to customize it. The things that you need to do. Maybe you need to point to your database. Maybe you need to change the logo. Maybe you want it to install in a certain way, but you don't want auto updates. You want auto updates. So there's many variations. So you have to customize it. So you create from whatever the developer gives you, you create a custom package. Then new release of the OS comes up, right? I'll update the custom package. It's not that much of a work. Next month, next month, next month, next month, next version, new version of the application. The cycle never ends. And this is manual. Don't make it manual. You have to automate it. And great tools out there to automate it. Let's see if there are questions. Yeah, Samit is smiling. Okay. That, by the way, reminds me of the Joker, ha ha ha, for some reason. Okay, enough about the challenges with MSIX. And well, the challenges are not with MSIX. The challenges is getting to MSIX. Once we get into the MSIX, life is beautiful, right? One day in about 2-3 years, more and more applications from developers will come natively with MSIX. So then your repackaging pains will be somewhat alleviated. But guess what? There will always be a set of applications, and I try to make that point, that you cannot put in a container. It just wouldn't make sense. And those you will continue to have to go through this packaging paralysis and have to deal with this before and after scenarios. Okay, so next. I did show the UI, and I did talk about remote app groups and how those allow us to have different users access to different application. One of the requirements that came was that we need to be able to define multiple desktop application groups. So today we have only one per host pool, which is not sufficient. If we want me and Samit, for example, to share one VM, both of us have full remote desktop access and different applications. Without multiple desktop application group, there is a way, but it's somewhat complicated. We should simplify it. We should allow it to have multiple desktop application groups. That's something that my team is working on, and I've been saying that for a while, but yeah, we're working on it. The other thing, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was doing the upload, when I was showing the UI for the Azure portal and how you add an MSIX package to your host pool, I copy paste the path. Why? Because I honestly didn't know what my path is. We need to have the browse functionality that allow you to go browse to your storage account and pick up the VHD. So that's something that we're gonna add. In hand in hand with that, we also want to add you the capability, what if the file is on my C drive? Like my MSIX is on the C drive, right? Or I don't have the VHD ready. I only have the MSIX. Well, we will build in the UI the capability for us to just give us the MSIX, and we'll make that whole thing, the whole MSIX image pain point go away for you. Okay, and the third thing is, well, third thing, I don't know, 16. Shared package containers. Okay, so let's chat a little bit about that. So we talked about how every MSIX application gets its own container. And then you come in and okay, Stefan, I have these two applications. They're supposed to talk to each other. They're in a different container. They're supposed to exchange these files in between. They can't. I get an error. The users can't use it. Well, duh. They're in a different containers. How are you expecting to be able to exchange between the two different containers if even the application itself running inside the container cannot exchange with the operating system? We're tricking it. Those of you that come or have some knowledge of AppV know about connection groups. So shared package containers is the same concept. We want to be able to allow for you to specify two different MSIX packages, but they run in the same container, so that isolation is between them. Is not between them. They see each other, but they're still isolated from the operating system. And here is an example of the proposed experience. So the packages have been published. They are active. Then we go to the desktop application group. And on that desktop application group, we can go and we can go and publish a new application. And when we publish that application, we'll be able to tell, well, we want these two active applications to be run in the same container. And then you will just select the application that you want. And we will be able to say, Chrome, in this case, will share a container with Power BI. And this way, the two applications will be able to see each other and talk to each other and remove that isolation. And that will make the percentage of applications that you can put in MSIX container much larger, because it will solve all the interop challenges that we have. Well, not all, but a lot of them with MSIX and a legacy application. So plugins, which is the canonical example for these interoperability challenges today with MSIX and MSIX App Attach, that goes away. And we are working on putting that functionality in the UI. Checking for questions, and we have 2 minutes. No, okay, I'll try to wrap this in 2 minutes. All right, we talk about the packaging paralysis. Wonderful slide, so you get to see a second time. I did touch on this. We have day one. You pick the applications that you know that you can repackage, or somebody has repackaged for you. You go and put them into your Azure Virtual Desktop environment. You take your test user, you go in, you start the application. Yay, it's working. I can see it, it starts. I'm done, ready for production. You start ramping up users, you start ramping up applications. You go through this first exercise of repackaging your, let's say you start small, you do 50 applications. You go through the pain point of repackaging your 50 applications, or maybe 49, because one of them will be already MSIX probably. You figure out after some pains that not all applications are suitable for MSIX. They're not suitable for containerization, okay? But then you figure out that packaging paralysis. Then you figure out, oops, new version of the application has shown up. Now I have to go through the same repackaging, automate repackaging. You want automating and testing automation of the repackaging. And as soon as you automate repackaging, you want to automate the testing of the converted apps. In WWD in general, The success for AVD is to automate everything. Don't use the UI. The UI is great for lookup. It's great for support. If you're managing an AVD environment, if you're having MSIX app attached, automate it. Automate the conversion, automate the testing. And I will stop here because that is the end of my slide. So we talked about the story of app attach a little bit. We talked about, we showed how app attach works in Azure Virtual Desktop. Some of the requirements, some of the pain points, some of the challenges and ways around them. Then I gave you a sneak peek in what we are going to be working on in the next 6 months. And then hopefully I was able to convince you in the minute and a half I spent on automation that is the path forward, and that's how you need to think about any AVD project that you're working on. Some resources here, if you want to dive deeper. The MSIX rules, this was the one that I referenced earlier. Oh, actually, apparently I did put a link to how to configure the storage part, the article, and I do have the video here, so I'm going to put that one shortly. And a few other things on my GitHub, there's some cool tools to help you troubleshoot when you get to that point. And that's it. Question time, or whatever's next in the agenda.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, there is one question in the chat.
Yeah, let me see. Some articles over the net describes adding users to share contributor and elevated permission role instead of adding VM machines as member. Well, I would not follow those articles. The official article is on docs.microsoft.com. I think Jen has shared it. We don't care about the user when it comes to MSIX app attach and the share. And yeah, there's some, I mean, it's a big world. There's a lot of information out there. Not all of it is correct. Go try it, and if it doesn't work, we can chat again. I don't see any other questions.
I think you got them all.
Okay, good.
I'm going to stop the recording.